It is only August, but I wanted to start making a tutorial on how to knit Selbu mittens. These are a Norwegian style mitten. Even though it's a little bit early, it takes time to make these mittens. And if you want to make several for gifts, or I think these are even really cute for decorating for Christmas, then you're going to want to get started. I consider myself still a beginner to intermediate knitter. I learned how to make these just by taking them step by step. So if you're new to knitting, I would find a tutorial on just a basic hat or a scarf so you can practice knitting and purling. You can get accustomed to the way the mechanics of knitting and all of that so you're comfortable. And I also would suggest practice casting on. When I have tried to help people learn to knit, that seems to be where they get hung up. I would also suggest, if this is your first time making mittens, that you just plan on making one mitten and don't worry about mistakes as you go. Let it be your practice mitten, and then you don't have to worry about is the gauge right? Are the needles right? You can learn on this mitten. Now I'm gonna let you know exactly which yarn I use, exactly which needles I use to get this mitten, which I think a pretty average sized person, and this fits me nicely, and it's fit every person that I've given it to. Don't be intimidated by the pattern. I'm gonna show you how easy it is. Let's get started. For the yarn, I'm using this yarn. It's called Raumagarn Strickagarn. So this is I think it's a 3-ply. I think that's what that means. So this is a yarn that I order from a yarn shop in Minneapolis, and I will provide the link in the down bar. You want to have 2 skeins of white and 2 skeins of another color. You won't use all of the yarn, but you will need more than 1 skein of each color. Some other supplies that you're gonna need, you'll need some scissors. I keep mine in a little scissor pouch because they are sharp. So you need it can be any kind of scissor that you want. You need some tape, and it can be painter's tape, a low tack tape, any kind of tape that you can pull up and reposition without ripping the paper. And this is important for me because it helps me keep track of which row I'm on, and it helps me keep track of the pattern. And you'll see how I use this in the tutorial. You also need a large safety pin, and you can have something like this, or there are also large knitting specific safety pins, but just something that's a large safety pin that's going to hold it's going to hold these stitches when we leave the thumb hole. It's going to hold those while we work on the rest of the mitten until we get back to the thumb. And again, that sounds intimidating, but it's really not hard once I show you. You're also going to want a pattern, and this is a book where I found a lot of wonderful patterns. You can find patterns on the internet, but we are making, I think the pattern I'm using is out of this book, which I'll link it as well, Mittens from Around Norway. What I have learned is a knitting pattern that is 60 stitches. When you count the stitches along the pattern, it's 60 stitches once the pattern starts, so before the cuff. It's fewer, and I'll show you that, but 60 stitches across on the pattern is what I've learned is it's a good pattern. It makes a good size mitten with the combination of needles and everything that I have. And if you're experimenting with patterns, I keep a book, and I would suggest doing that same thing, so that I made a note for the Selbu mittens I made, what the pattern was, what yarn I used, and also the needles I used. I know what works. I don't have to just remember it off the top of my head. So I'm gonna go ahead and make this pattern actually, which is very similar to this one. When you see an extra pattern like this, usually this is for the cuff of the mitten, but we're just gonna make a striped cuff that is kind of stretchy so it stays on your wrist really well. Out of a book, I'll make a copy of the pattern. So then I'm able to, first of all, use a piece of tape to mark. I'm gonna not do this part, which is part of the cuff, but so I can mark which row I'm on. And then when I finish a row, I can mark it. So these are 2.75 needles, but if you're using used needles or anything, you can check them in a gauge. And you're going to need 5 double-pointed needles. I actually have 6 here, so I have a set I'm missing a set actually, so it's probably from that set. So you're going to need 5 2.75 needles, and make sure all of the needles are the same. Make sure you have good points on both ends, that the needles are in good condition. And I actually love working on double point needles. I think it's easy to keep track of where you are. And I like them better than using needles that are connected by a cord or a cable. So this is what we're going to use, and I'm going to show you how to do it in a way that's hopefully easy. And but I just want to encourage you not to be intimidated by using double pointed needles. And I will link to the exact ones that I use. Okay, so we're going to set the pattern aside right now. You certainly can do extra cuff designs and stuff if you want to, but as I said, we're just going to make a very simple cuff, and I will write the pattern for it if you just want to zip through that. But if you've never worked on double pointed needles before, let me kind of walk you through it. So we're going to start just on one needle, and we're going to measure out a pretty good length of yarn. I just kind of eyeball it so that we can cast on. And this is the casting on method that I like. So I hold the yarn between my fingers like this, and then grab the excess yarn with these 3 fingers. And then I'm going to use the needle to make what looks like a diamond shape. Okay? And then from here, I'm going to take the needle, oops, okay, from here, I'm going to take the needle and put it under the thread that's running under my thumb, and then under the one that's on top of my index finger, and then through this loop and pull it. Under the one around my thumb, under the one in front of the index finger, and then pull it through the loop. And that's the cast on method that I use. I like that this makes a nice tight loop, and this is the kind of thing you just have to practice over and over again. But we're going to cast on 56 stitches. And this first one, because it loops on twice, you count that just as 1. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that's 56 stitches. So I ended up with way too much left over here. When you're casting on, you can draw yarn from both ends. So I'll just set that aside and use that for an extra little project, but you don't need to pull off as much as I did. Now we're going to divide this between 4 needles. So we have 56 stitches. So remember, this first one here counts as 2. 56 stitches, so we're gonna put 14 on each needle. This is one reason why I like working across these double pointed needles, because every time at the end of the row, I can see if I'm on track with my pattern or not. So if I do have to make an adjustment, I usually only have to go back 15 stitches or less instead of having to undo several rows, which with crochet is much easier than with knitting. Anytime you have to undo something in knitting, it is a production. Now, I want to show you too, you would think that this would just slide all apart, but I have not found that to be the case. I have found that if you cast on properly, it all just stays in place. So I've never had trouble with a needle just slipping out. I have pulled out a needle accidentally, but I've never had them just slip off. So this is a lot more stable than you might guess. I can just let these other 2 needles dangle while I'm working, and that'll be just fine. If things are slipping off, then you've cast on too loosely. Okay, so we've got 14, and let's just double check this one. Okay, we have the right number of stitches. So we're ready to start knitting the cuff. So this is where I think people freak out a little bit if they're not familiar with working on double pointed needles. And I get that. But what helps me is to lay it on a surface so that it's flat, and to lay it in a square, and to make sure that all of the stitches are pointing in the right direction, that none of these stitches are twisted. It's just a nice lined up square. Okay, so we have this laid out, and we have all of the stitches facing in the same direction. Now we want to flip it over because we're going to take, let me get the tail out of the way. We want to take this working yarn and use it to make this a full circle, to make the cuff. So this is where we're going to start knitting. So we're going to be using this needle, and just let the other ones sort of flap around. It does seem weird, but that's actually how it works. And since this was our first cast on, it put 2 loops on the needle. So we're gonna knit these first 2 using this working yarn. So we go under that, bring this up, and this is the only time you have to do this. Once it's connected, it's connected. So we're gonna do 1 knit there, and then these are the only 2 needles that you need to focus on, or these 2 that you're working on. So we're gonna knit 2 and then purl 2. knit 2. And purl 2. We're going to do that all the way around this first round. So because we finished this first row with knit 2, then we're going to start the second row with purl 2. It's not so much the second row, the second needle with purl 2. And you should end this last needle with purl 2, because then you start the next row with knit 2. That last one was tight. Okay, so there we go. We've got our first row. The stripe pattern can really be whatever you want, but we're gonna do, for this mitten, I'm going to do 6 rows of the cream and then alternate 2 rows of the gold, I'm gonna be using this, 2 rows cream, 2 rows gold, and all the way up until I have 5 stripes, and then I'll do 6 rows and then before I get to the pattern. So I'll show you what that looks like, but just in case you want to, you know how to do this and you want to run with it and just make the cuff, that is the pattern. It'll also be written in the down bar. For the second row, well, for every subsequent row, we're going to follow this same knit, knit, purl, purl pattern all the way around, so that that's what creates that kind of stretchy cuff that stays nicely on your wrist. If you're new to knitting, I do want to encourage you that it does take a while to kind of see what you're doing, and also to know if what you're looking at is what you wanted to do or not. This is a great thing, just to make a cuff over and over again is a great place to practice and get comfortable. But when you're looking at knitting, you should see the knit makes a V. And so on the needle, the yarn will just be sticking down straight into the work. And the purls will have a little bar across the front from having the yarn in front when you're working. So you should be able to pretty clearly, even on the second row, start to see if you're on track with the pattern. Okay, so we've got the first 2 rows done, and I'm going to do 4 more rows exactly like this. But I just wanted to show you what this looks like. You can already start to see the cuff pattern, and you know when you get to the tail that that's your cue that you've done 1 row. Double pointed needles kind of segment things a little bit easier for me. Anyway, I just find it's easier to keep track than if I'm working on circular needles. So I'm going to add 4 more rows, and then I'll show you how we put in another color to make a stripe, and you won't believe how easy it is.